The rancher's greatest mistake was offering his bed to a giant Apache stranger. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. In the vast, dry plains of the American West, there was a rancher named Samuel Hayes. His life had been one of isolation and hard work. His ranch was small, barely enough to keep him occupied, but it was his sanctuary. Samuel had learned to live alone, away from the bustling towns and the noise of society. He had no family to speak of, no friends to visit, just the land and his animals. Life had been simple, yet monotonous. It was on one of those long, silent afternoons when he first noticed the figure in the distance. At first, he thought it was just another mirage, a trick of the desert sun playing with his mind. But as the figure drew closer, Samuel realized it was no illusion. A woman, a giant woman. She was tall, much taller than any woman Samuel had ever seen, and her presence seemed to demand attention. Her broad shoulders and strong, purposeful strides made her seem like she belonged to the land itself. She was dressed in traditional Apache attire, but there was something else about her that set her apart. Her size was intimidating, almost unnatural. Samuel felt a mix of curiosity and unease as she approached his ranch. He had lived in the West long enough to know that strangers, especially those from the native tribes, were often best avoided. But there was something different about this woman, something that made him hesitate. When she arrived at the front gate of his ranch, she didn't say a word. She simply stood there, staring at Samuel with eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. He swallowed nervously, unsure of what to do. He was alone, after all, and the last thing he needed was trouble. Still, something in her gaze softened the edge of his fear. He was a man, of good conscience, and he knew that if someone was in need, he should offer help. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Samuel asked cautiously. The woman spoke softly, her voice a low, melodic sound. "I've been traveling for days," she said, "and I need a place to rest." Her voice carried a hint of weariness, and Samuel could see the exhaustion in her posture. His instincts told him to turn her away, but his heart told him otherwise. He had always prided himself on being kind and offering help to those in need, so against his better judgment, he invited her inside. "You're welcome to stay here for the night," Samuel said, stepping aside to allow her in. She nodded in appreciation, her expression unreadable. As they made their way into the small cabin, Samuel could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another stranger looking for shelter. This woman was different, and he knew it. But little did he know, offering her a place to rest would lead to his greatest mistake. As the night wore on, the silence between them was palpable. The woman had not spoken much, only occasionally offering a word of gratitude. Samuel tried not to focus on her size, though it was hard not to. She was a presence, both physically and mentally. As he prepared a simple meal, he found himself watching her, unsure of what to make of the situation. Was she just a traveler, or was there more to her story? Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that there was something hidden beneath the surface. As the evening came to an end, the woman settled onto the makeshift bed Samuel had offered her. He, on the other hand, took the small cot in the corner of the room. He lay awake for hours, his mind racing with thoughts of who she was and why she had come to his ranch. But before he could figure it out, he drifted off to sleep, unaware that this seemingly innocent act of kindness would soon spiral into a chain of events that would change his life forever. The night passed quietly, and as the first light of morning broke over the horizon, Samuel awoke to the sound of the woman moving about the cabin. Her presence was so commanding, yet she moved with the quiet grace of someone who was used to both solitude and strength. Samuel lay still for a moment, watching her as she packed her few belongings into a worn leather pouch. He could see the outline of the silver pendant she wore around her neck, glowing softly in the early light. It was strange how someone so large could move with such ease. Samuel had never met anyone quite like her, and the more he observed, the more his curiosity grew. He had helped many strangers before, but none had left him with the strange mixture of awe and unease that this woman did. She finished her task and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for your kindness," she said, her voice low but clear. "I will be leaving soon." Samuel sat up in bed, unsure of how to respond. "You're welcome," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "Where will you go?" She hesitated for a moment, her gaze flicking to the door, as if considering her next words carefully. "I have no place to go," she admitted. "But I must move on. There are things I cannot escape." Samuel's heart tightened. There was something in her tone, something that hinted at a deeper pain she was unwilling to reveal. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "The offer still stands." The woman shook her head, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I cannot stay. I have my own path to follow." Samuel watched her, feeling a strange sense of helplessness. He wanted to offer more, to insist she stay longer, but he could sense she wouldn't accept. She was not the type to rely on others for long. She was used to facing the world on her own, as he was. "Very well," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But should you need anything, you know where to find me." She nodded once, then turned toward the door. As she stepped outside, Samuel couldn't help but watch her retreating figure. There was something about her that both intrigued and unsettled him. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed in a way he couldn't yet understand. As the woman walked toward the horizon, he felt the weight of a decision he hadn't even realized he'd made. Offering his bed to a giant Apache stranger had been an innocent act of kindness, but it had set in motion a series of events that would soon unravel the peace he had worked so hard to build. Little did he know, this was only the beginning. The woman stopped just before the edge of the property, looking back toward the cabin. For a moment, their eyes met. It was a brief glance, but in that moment, Samuel felt an undeniable connection. Then, without a word, she turned and disappeared into the distance. Samuel stood at the doorway for several moments, the weight of the encounter settling over him like a heavy fog. What had she meant by those words? What was she running from? He knew, in his heart, that he would not see her again for a long time, but somehow, he also knew that she would never truly leave his life. The feeling lingered in the air like a promise or a warning. As the day wore on, Samuel couldn't focus on his work. His thoughts kept drifting back to her, the way she had stood tall, unyielding, yet so vulnerable in her own way. She was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a mystery he couldn't quite let go of. And in the back of his mind, a question kept echoing. What had he truly done by offering her his bed? Hours passed, and the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. Samuel finally sat down to a simple dinner, his appetite gone, replaced by a gnawing feeling of unease. Just as he was about to finish his meal, a faint sound reached his ears, hooves approaching fast. His heart skipped a beat. He stood up, straining his ears, wondering who could be coming at this hour. Then, the unmistakable sound of riders drew nearer. He rushed to the window, peering out into the gathering darkness. At first, he saw nothing but the dim outline of the land stretching out before him. But then, the riders appeared, 4 of them, moving in perfect formation, their horses steady and sure. They were coming for him, he realized. His pulse quickened. It was them, the riders. They had come for the woman. The thought raced through his mind. Had they followed her here? Did they know what had happened? He felt a strange sense of dread settle in his chest. Whatever this was, whatever had brought them here, he was about to find out. As the riders drew closer, Samuel's instincts kicked in. He couldn't let them reach the cabin. He had to act, but his options were limited. Should he run? Should he hide? Or should he confront them head-on, just as he had with the woman who had left him with so many questions? With his heart pounding in his chest, Samuel grabbed his rifle and stepped outside into the cool evening air, ready to face whatever was coming his way. Samuel stood frozen at the doorway, rifle in hand, as the riders approached. His heart raced, his mind scrambling to make sense of what was happening. For figures on horseback, moving with the purpose of a well-trained group. They were coming for him, that much was clear. He could feel the weight of the situation settle over him like a storm cloud. The question was, what did they want? Had they come for the woman he had helped the night before? Had they followed her trail here, to his doorstep? He had no way of knowing for sure, but instinct told him that things were about to take a dangerous turn. The riders were almost upon him now. As they drew closer, Samuel noticed the dark expressions on their faces. These were not the faces of friendly travelers, but the faces of men who had come to settle something. He stepped outside, holding his rifle tight against his chest, ready for whatever might come next. The air was cool, but a tension hung thick in the atmosphere, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The riders halted in front of him, their horses stamping impatiently in the dirt. The leader, a tall man with a scar running across his cheek, dismounted and approached with slow, deliberate steps. "You, the rancher?" the man asked, his voice low and gravelly. Samuel nodded cautiously, keeping his rifle raised but not pointed directly at them. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the unease building in his chest. The man studied him for a moment, sizing him up, before he spoke again. "We're looking for a woman," he said. "A woman who passed through here last night. An Apache." Samuel's heart skipped a beat. The woman. She had left before dawn, but they had come for her. He had no doubt in his mind now. "I haven't seen anyone," he lied, hoping his voice didn't betray him. The leader's eyes narrowed. "You're lying," he said flatly. "We know she was here. We tracked her here. And we know you helped her." Samuel's throat went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, trying to remain calm. "I've helped no one." The leader took a step closer, his gaze never leaving Samuel's face. "You think we don't know who you are? We know you helped her. And now, you'll pay for it." Samuel's grip on the rifle tightened. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive, and he knew he had to make a decision. Was this the moment he stood up for what was right, or did he back down and avoid confrontation? He had always lived a life of solitude, of keeping to himself, but this was different. This wasn't just about him anymore. He had offered a kind gesture to a stranger, and now he was being threatened for it. A strange sense of resolve washed over him. He wasn't going to let these men intimidate him. "Not today. I won't let you hurt anyone," Samuel said, his voice steady now, the weight of his decision settling in. The leader raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting such defiance. "You're either with us, or you're against us," the man said, his hand hovering over the hilt of his knife. Samuel didn't flinch. "I'm not with you," he said, "and I won't stand by while you terrorize someone else." The leader's expression darkened. He nodded to the men behind him, and in an instant, they were moving towards Samuel, surrounding him. But before they could make another move, a voice rang out from behind him. "You'll have to get through me first." The woman. She had returned. Samuel turned to see her standing in the doorway, tall and strong, her presence filling the space like a storm. She stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the men with an unwavering gaze. "She's not alone," Samuel said, his heart pounding in his chest. The woman had come back to protect him, just as he had helped protect her. The riders looked at her, hesitant now. The leader's face twisted in anger. "We don't need your help, woman," he spat. "This is none of your business." "It is now," she said, her voice steady, commanding. "And if you want to lay a hand on this rancher, you'll have to go through me first." The leader took a step back, considering her words, but there was something in the air now. Something had shifted. The tension had reached a boiling point, and it was clear that this confrontation was not going to end without consequences. The men hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. It was then that Samuel realized just how much the woman had meant to him. She had come back not just for herself, but for him, for the kindness he had shown her. She had given him a chance to stand up for what was right, and now, they were both in this together. The woman moved closer to Samuel, her presence a protective shield. Samuel lowered his rifle slightly, no longer pointing it at the men, but still ready to act if necessary. "I won't let you threaten us," the woman said, her voice firm. The leader looked around at his men, and Samuel could see the uncertainty in their eyes. These were not men who had expected resistance. And for the first time in a long while, Samuel felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could stand up to this. "We'll leave," the leader said, his voice barely a whisper. "But know this, rancher, you've made an enemy today." The riders turned and began to mount their horses, but before they left, the leader threw one last glance at Samuel. "Next time, it won't be so easy." And with that, they rode off into the distance, leaving Samuel and the woman standing together in the fading light of the evening. The days following the encounter with the riders were filled with a quiet tension. Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed. The woman's presence lingered in his thoughts, her defiance against the riders echoing in his mind. She had shown him a side of himself that he hadn't known existed, a side willing to stand up, not just for what was right, but for someone else. The following morning, the woman had gone. She left no trace behind, as quietly as she had arrived. Samuel had woken to an empty cabin, the silence feeling heavier than usual. His thoughts were a whirlwind, and with each passing hour, he found himself thinking about her more and more. He had to admit to himself that he was now tethered to her in a way he hadn't anticipated. The kindness he had shown her the night before seemed so small in comparison to the wave of consequences it had unleashed. His life was no longer just his own. The world outside his ranch, once so distant and disconnected, now felt closer, more immediate. It wasn't long before Samuel found himself walking along the same path the riders had taken. There was something inside him urging him to follow, to see where it led. Despite his usual reluctance to get involved in other people's troubles, Samuel couldn't ignore the sense that he was meant to act. The ranch was quiet that morning, as it always was, with nothing more than the sound of the wind in the trees and the occasional lowing of cattle. But as he approached the edge of his land, he saw something that made his blood run cold, a plume of dust rising in the distance. At first, he thought it might just be another group of travelers, but the dust was too thick, too purposeful. This wasn't the slow march of wandering souls, but the fast approach of riders. Samuel's hand instinctively went to the rifle strapped to his back. He didn't know who they were, but he had a feeling they weren't friendly. As the riders neared, Samuel's breath caught in his throat. There, leading the group, was the woman, the giant Apache stranger. But she was no longer alone. Behind her were a dozen men, Apache warriors, moving with the precision of a well-trained army. Their faces were hard, their eyes focused. The woman's presence was still as commanding as before, but now it was amplified by the power of the men at her back. She was no longer just the lone traveler seeking shelter. She had become a force to be reckoned with. Samuel stepped forward, unsure of what to do. Was she here to thank him again? Or had she come to ask for something more? He couldn't tell, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. The woman caught sight of him as he approached and gestured for her men to halt. She rode toward him, the other warriors following her lead, but staying back at a respectful distance. As she dismounted, she walked toward Samuel with the same calm confidence she had shown the night they first met. "I never expected to see you again," Samuel said, his voice betraying a hint of confusion and wariness. "Nor I you," the woman replied, her voice steady. "But things have changed, and I need your help once more." Samuel's heart skipped a beat. What could she want from him now? He had already helped her, had already risked his safety for a stranger. What more could he offer? "What is it?" he asked, his voice betraying the weight of his concern. The woman looked past him, her gaze sweeping over the ranch as if taking in the land for the first time. "My people are in danger," she said. "The riders who came here before were not the only ones searching for me. There are others, more dangerous, and they won't stop until they have what they want." Samuel felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't know what she meant by what they want, but he had a sinking feeling it wasn't something good. "What can I do?" he asked, the words feeling almost too heavy to say. The woman's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of vulnerability in her gaze. "I need your help to protect my people. Your ranch, your land. It's the only place we can hide. But I cannot do it alone. I need you to stand with us." Samuel's mind raced. He had already risked his safety once, but this was different. The stakes were higher now, and he knew that whatever this was, it was far from over. "You've already done enough," the woman said, sensing his hesitation. "But this time, I'm asking for your trust. If you help us, we will repay you, in ways you cannot yet understand." Samuel stood there, feeling the weight of her words settle on him. Could he trust her? Could he trust this strange new world she had brought into his life? He didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't turn his back on it now. He had already made his choice. "I'll help you," Samuel said, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes." The woman nodded, a faint smile crossing her face. "Thank you," she said. "You'll see soon enough that you've made the right choice." And with that, the woman turned to her warriors, signaling for them to come closer. Samuel watched as they began to dismount and set up camp near the ranch. The silence of the morning had been replaced by the quiet buzz of activity, and Samuel knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The camp was set up quickly, the warriors working in unison, their movements deliberate and precise. Samuel stood on the edge of the clearing, watching them. The woman, whose name he still hadn't learned, was directing the men with quiet authority, her eyes scanning the horizon as though expecting danger at any moment. Samuel's thoughts were a whirlwind. He had made his choice to help her, but he wasn't sure what that really meant. What was he getting himself into? The ranch was his home, his sanctuary, and now it had become something else entirely, a battleground, a place where the fates of others would play out. The warriors were not ordinary men. They moved with a purpose that Samuel had only seen in military units, and he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe and fear as he watched them. His own life, so simple and predictable until now, was being upended by this woman and the forces she had brought with her. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the woman finally approached him. She had removed her cloak, revealing a more practical outfit beneath, leather and furs, tailored for movement and battle. There was no softness to her appearance, only strength and resolve. "You've done the right thing," she said, her voice low and steady. "I know it's not easy, but you'll see why we need your help." Samuel nodded, his throat tight with uncertainty. "What exactly do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice carrying more hesitation than he intended. The woman studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes never leaving his. "The riders who came before were only a small part of it," she said. "There are others, more dangerous, who want what we have. They'll stop at nothing to get it." Samuel's stomach twisted at her words. He had heard rumors of such things, the constant tension between settlers and native tribes, but he never imagined he would be caught in the middle. "What is it that they want?" he asked. "Why is it so important?" The woman paused, as though considering how much to reveal. "We carry knowledge. Ancient knowledge," she said, her voice dropping lower. "It's something that could change the balance of power in this land. That's why they'll keep coming." Samuel felt a chill run through him. This was no longer just a matter of protecting a woman or her tribe. It was about something much bigger, something that could shift the very foundation of everything he had known. "What does this knowledge have to do with me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She met his gaze squarely. "You helped me when no one else would. You showed kindness, and for that, I owe you. But now, you're part of something much larger than just your ranch. These people, the ones chasing us, they know you've helped us. And that makes you a target." Samuel's heart pounded in his chest. He had never wanted any part of such a conflict. He was just a rancher. But now, he had no choice but to stand by the woman and her warriors. He had opened the door to this world, and now, he had to see it through. "What do you need me to do?" he asked again, his voice more determined this time. The woman smiled, a rare softening of her features. "You'll help us defend this land," she said. "You'll help us fight." Samuel nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. He had never fought in a battle like this before. He had always been a man of the land, of hard work and solitude. But now, the land had become a battleground, and he had to decide where his loyalty lay. The woman turned to her warriors, giving them orders in a language Samuel didn't understand. They moved quickly, preparing for the night ahead, sharpening their weapons and securing the camp. Samuel stood still, his mind racing. This wasn't just about protecting his ranch anymore. This was about standing up for something bigger than himself, something that could change everything. As the last light of day faded and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Samuel felt the weight of the responsibility he had just taken on. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same again. The woman walked back toward him, her eyes meeting his. "Are you ready?" she asked. Samuel looked out over the land, the ranch he had worked so hard to build. It was his home, and he would fight for it. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. The woman nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. "Then let's make sure they never take what's ours." The warriors gathered around the campfire, the flames flickering in the night. The quiet of the land had been shattered, replaced by the tension of impending conflict. Samuel sat down among them, feeling an unfamiliar sense of unity. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a part of something much larger, and together, they would stand against whatever came for them. The night was dark, and the air was thick with anticipation. The only sound was the crackling of the fire, and the soft murmurs of the warriors preparing for what lay ahead. Samuel knew that in the coming days, he would be forced to make choices he never imagined. But whatever happened, he would stand by the woman who had come into his life and changed everything. He had made his choice, and now there was no turning back. The night passed with an eerie quiet, the only sounds being the crackling of the fire and the occasional whisper of wind. Samuel sat beside the flames, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. His life had been simple before, filled with the rhythm of work on the ranch. But now, everything had changed. The woman and her warriors had made it clear. He was no longer just a rancher. He was part of something much bigger, something that could alter the very course of his future. As the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, the camp came to life. The warriors moved with purpose, preparing their weapons, checking the perimeter, and ensuring that everything was in order. Samuel watched them, still uncertain of what exactly he was meant to do. He wasn't a soldier. He didn't know how to fight, not in the way these men did. Yet, he couldn't deny the bond that had formed between him and them. They had accepted him, and in a way, they had made him a part of their tribe. The woman approached him as the camp stirred with activity. She was already dressed in her battle gear, her expression hard, yet there was a softness too. Her eyes when she looked at him. "We move out at dawn," she said. "The riders will be here soon, and we need to be ready." Samuel nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of what was coming. "What exactly are we up against?" he asked, his voice steady, though inside he was filled with anxiety. The woman's eyes flickered to the horizon, her gaze distant. "They're not like the men you saw before. These are soldiers. Men who fight for power, for control. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want." Samuel felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Soldiers. Real soldiers. The kind who would kill without hesitation to achieve their goal. The stakes had just risen higher than he had ever imagined. He had agreed to help protect the woman and her people, but he hadn't fully understood what that meant until now. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," Samuel admitted, his voice low. The woman met his gaze, her expression softening for a brief moment. "You don't have to be a soldier to fight for what's right," she said. "All you need is courage and the willingness to protect those who can't protect themselves." Her words rang in his ears, a quiet encouragement. He wasn't ready, not in the way she had expected him to be. But he knew she was right. Courage wasn't about knowing how to fight. It was about standing up when the time came. And this was that time. "I'll do my best," Samuel said, the resolve in his voice stronger now. "That's all any of us can do," she replied. As the camp prepared for the coming battle, Samuel joined the warriors, his heart racing with every step. He was given a bow and a quiver of arrows, tools he had never used before but would have to learn quickly. The warriors showed him how to string the bow, how to hold it steady, how to aim. Samuel felt clumsy at first, unsure of his ability to use the weapon. But the warriors didn't judge him. They were patient, offering guidance when needed, encouragement when it was earned. The sun had risen fully by the time the woman gave the signal. They moved out, a quiet, determined group, moving through the brush toward the place where the riders were expected to arrive. The land was vast, the sky open, and Samuel couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a fight for the woman or her people. It was a fight for survival, for justice, for everything he had come to care about. As they approached the edge of the clearing, the sounds of horses grew louder. Samuel's breath quickened as the riders came into view, their horses kicking up dust as they rode. The woman held up a hand, signaling the warriors to stop. They moved into position, their eyes trained on the riders who were coming closer by the second. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he stood at the ready, his bow in hand. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing. He was ready to face whatever came. The riders stopped just short of the clearing, their eyes scanning the horizon. The woman stepped forward, her presence commanding, unyielding. "This is as far as you go," she called out, her voice carrying across the open land. The leader of the riders, a tall man with a cruel smile, dismounted, his eyes locking with the woman's. "You've made a grave mistake, Apache," he sneered. "You have no idea what you're up against." The woman's expression didn't falter. "I know exactly what I'm up against," she said, her voice calm, yet filled with strength. "And I'm not afraid of you." The two stood facing each other, the tension between them palpable. Samuel felt his grip tighten on the bow. He had never been in a standoff like this before, but he knew that this was just the beginning. The riders were here to take what they wanted, and it was up to him, the woman, and her warriors to stop them. The woman nodded to her warriors, who moved into position, ready to defend their land. Samuel took a deep breath and stepped forward, his eyes focused on the riders, ready to face whatever was to come. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he would have to stand and fight. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose, a sense that he was where he needed to be. The air was thick with tension as the two sides stood facing each other in the clearing. Samuel's heart raced in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. He had never been in a situation like this before. The woman's calm resolve was a sharp contrast to the storm of uncertainty that churned inside him. The riders were no longer just a distant threat. They were here, right in front of him, ready to take whatever they wanted. The leader of the riders stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he sized up the woman, then shifting to the warriors behind her. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "This is bigger than you, bigger than all of you." The woman didn't flinch, her eyes steady and focused. "We know exactly what we're dealing with," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "And we won't let you take it." Samuel felt the weight of her words. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for her people, for everything they had fought for. And in that moment, Samuel realized that he wasn't just standing beside her. He was standing for something bigger than himself, something that had been forgotten for far too long. The leader of the riders scowled, then motioned for his men to dismount. "We've come to take what's ours," he said. "And if you're in our way, we'll take that too." Samuel gripped his bow tighter, feeling the tension in his muscles as he prepared for whatever would come next. He had never been a fighter, but he knew that this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about standing up for what was right. The woman gave a slight nod to her warriors, who moved into position, their eyes locked on the riders. They weren't just preparing for a fight. They were preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of everything they had fought for. The leader of the riders signaled his men to move forward, but before they could take a single step, the woman stepped into their path. "You'll have to go through us first," she said, her voice low but filled with authority. The riders hesitated, unsure of what to do. They had expected resistance, but they hadn't expected someone like her. She wasn't just a woman. She was a force of nature. The tension between the two sides was palpable, each waiting for the other to make the first move. Samuel could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, the air heavy with anticipation. Then, without warning, the first arrow flew through the air, whistling past Samuel's ear. The battle had begun. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the warriors move with precision, their arrows finding their targets with deadly accuracy. The riders had no chance against them. Samuel, however, was unsure of what to do. He had never fought like this before. His hands were shaking as he held the bow, trying to remember everything the warriors had taught him. He pulled back the string and released an arrow, watching it soar through the air and strike one of the riders in the shoulder. The man fell from his horse with a cry, but Samuel didn't have time to watch. He was already pulling another arrow from his quiver, preparing for the next shot. The battle raged on, the sound of hooves and arrows filling the air. Samuel's senses were heightened, every movement around him sharp and clear. The woman fought beside him, her strength and skill unmatched. She moved like a storm, her every action calculated and precise. She was a warrior, and Samuel couldn't help but be in awe of her. But he didn't have time for admiration. The riders were relentless, and they were beginning to push back. Samuel's heart raced as he saw the leader of the riders coming toward him, a knife drawn and a look of pure hatred in his eyes. The man was fast, too fast for Samuel to react in time. But just as the rider lunged at him, the woman appeared out of nowhere, her strength and speed knocking the man to the ground with a powerful strike. "Stay close," she said, her voice steady as she pulled Samuel to his feet. "We need to finish this." Samuel nodded, adrenaline surging through him. He wasn't going to let her down. Together, they fought back against the riders, each movement bringing them closer to victory. But it wasn't easy. The riders were fierce, and they weren't going to give up without a fight. Samuel felt the sting of an arrow graze his arm, but he pushed through the pain, refusing to let it stop him. The woman, too, was injured, a gash along her side where one of the riders had managed to land a blow. But she didn't flinch. She kept fighting, kept moving forward, and Samuel followed her lead. It felt like hours before the last of the riders were either driven off or taken down. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and blood, the sounds of battle fading into silence. Samuel stood, panting, his bow still in his hands, looking around at the aftermath. The warriors were victorious, but at a heavy cost. Several of them were wounded, and the woman herself looked exhausted, blood staining her clothes. Samuel approached her, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. The woman met his gaze, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I'll live," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But we've won. This land is safe, for now." Samuel nodded, feeling a strange sense of pride. They had done it. Together, they had fought and won. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. There would always be more battles to fight, more enemies to face. And the woman had been right. They had only just begun. The battle had left its mark on Samuel and the warriors. The air was thick with dust, and the quiet that followed was almost deafening. The ground was littered with the aftermath of the fight, arrows, weapons, and the bodies of the fallen riders. Samuel stood among the warriors, his heart still racing as he took in the scene around him. The woman, though covered in dirt and blood, was already moving around, checking on her people, making sure everyone was accounted for. Samuel couldn't help but watch her. She had been the anchor during the fight, the one who had led them with unwavering determination. But now, in the aftermath, she seemed different. There was a weariness in her eyes, a vulnerability that Samuel hadn't seen before. He approached her slowly, trying to find the right words. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. She glanced at him, offering a faint smile. "I'll be fine," she replied, though her voice was tinged with exhaustion. "It's the others I'm worried about." Samuel nodded, understanding. There had been casualties on both sides. Though they had won the battle, it had come at a heavy price. The warriors had fought bravely, but several of them were injured, and the woman herself had a wound on her side that needed attention. "We need to get the injured back to camp," she said, turning toward the warriors who were tending to the wounded. "They'll need rest and care before we move again." Samuel followed her, helping where he could, though his hands felt clumsy compared to the warriors' practiced movements. He had never been a healer, but he knew the basics. He helped bind wounds and carry the injured to the makeshift camp they had set up earlier. As they worked, Samuel found his thoughts drifting. The battle had been brutal, but it had also opened his eyes to something he hadn't fully understood before. He wasn't just protecting a piece of land anymore. He was part of something larger, a community, a people. And these people, led by this woman, were willing to fight and die for each other. When they had finished tending to the injured, the woman walked over to him. She was wiping blood from her hands, her expression still serious, but there was a hint of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. Samuel gave her a small nod, unsure of what to say. "We did what we had to do," he replied, his voice steady. "But this isn't over, is it?" The woman shook her head. "No, it's not." She paused for a moment, her gaze far away, as if she were thinking of something more than just the battle they had just fought. "There will always be more to fight for. But this time, we've made a stand. We've shown them that we won't back down." Samuel looked at her, seeing her in a new light. She was more than just a warrior. She was a leader, someone who carried the weight of her people on her shoulders. And yet, despite the burden, she remained unbroken. "I don't know what I expected," Samuel said, shaking his head slightly. "But I never thought it would be like this." The woman looked at him, her eyes softening for a moment. "You don't have to understand everything," she said. "All you need to know is that we're in this together. And that's enough." Samuel didn't reply immediately. Instead, he simply nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep within him. It wasn't about understanding everything. It was about being there, standing side by side, no matter the odds. As the evening settled in, the warriors gathered around the fire, their faces weary but determined. The woman took her place among them, and Samuel did the same. For the first time since the battle had begun, he felt a sense of belonging. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was part of something real, something worth fighting for. The fire crackled in the silence. And as they sat there, Samuel couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The battle was over for now, but the war was far from finished. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't facing them alone. The woman, her warriors, and now himself were all connected by something stronger than fear or uncertainty. They were bound by a shared purpose, a shared hope. And that hope, Samuel realized, was something worth fighting for. The days that followed were filled with quiet determination. The battle had left its mark on everyone, physically, emotionally, and mentally, but they moved forward, each person understanding the weight of what had happened. The warriors, though wounded, carried themselves with the same resolve they always had, and Samuel found himself among them, his body sore, but his spirit stronger than before. The woman, as always, was at the center of it all, her presence like a pillar holding everyone together. She was no longer just the stranger who had come into his life, but the leader of a people, and Samuel was now irrevocably tied to that cause. The ranch, once a place of solitude and peace, had become a symbol of resistance, of hope. They had fought for it, and though the battle had been won, the fight for survival was far from over. Samuel worked alongside the warriors, learning their ways, becoming more adept with the bow and arrow, more familiar with the strategy and discipline that came with living as part of a tribe. As the weeks passed, Samuel began to understand the deeper meaning of the life the woman and her people had lived. It was not just about survival. It was about honor, about protecting what mattered most, about standing up for those who couldn't stand for themselves. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the camp gathered around the fire, the woman came to Samuel. Her face, though still marked by the battle they had fought, held an air of quiet relief. She had led them through the worst of the storm, and now they were standing on the other side. "We've made it through this battle," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But there will always be more. We can't let our guard down." Samuel nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had seen it now, the never-ending cycle of conflict, the constant fight to protect what they loved. But he also saw something else, something that had become clear to him over the past few weeks. "I'll stand with you," he said, his voice steady. "No matter what comes." The woman met his gaze, a flicker of something passing between them, a quiet understanding, a shared bond that had been forged in the fire of battle. "You've already proven that," she replied, her tone softening slightly. "You've earned your place among us." The words struck Samuel harder than he expected. He had never thought of himself as anything other than a simple rancher, a man who lived a quiet, solitary life. But now, he was part of something much bigger than himself, something that mattered more than his own safety or comfort. It was a humbling thought, and one that filled him with both pride and fear. As the fire crackled and the warriors settled in for the night, Samuel sat beside the woman, the two of them sharing a moment of quiet reflection. The road ahead would not be easy, but they had each other. And they had something stronger than fear or uncertainty, a purpose. Samuel had no idea what the future would hold. He didn't know what challenges they would face or how many more battles would come their way. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone anymore. He had chosen his path, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. As the night stretched on, the sound of the wind rustling the trees was the only noise, and for the first time in days, Samuel felt at peace. The woman, the warriors, and the land, they were all part of him now. And together, they would face whatever the future held, with strength and unity. The sun would rise again, and when it did, they would be ready for whatever came next. For Samuel, there was no turning back. The choice he had made had bound him to something greater than himself, and he was ready to stand by it, come what may.